Welcome back to one of our Friday art-based meditation sessions from the Freer and Sackler Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. We're so glad that you have joined us today. Today's session will be led by Phil Bender, who many of you know well. Hi, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Phil's going to introduce us to a beautiful artwork in our collection that really is one of my favorites. I think that everyone will enjoy seeing this work and going through the process that we'll see today. We'll have about a 25 to 30-minute meditation led by Phil. Then we will have a spotlight talk, a chance to learn a little more about the artwork with Matthew Loznoski, who's a communication specialist and educator at Freer Sackler, and particularly a specialist in Islamic art. So thanks to Matthew for being with us. And any questions you have about the artwork, you'll have a chance to ask those at the end. So I will turn it over now to Phil.
Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you all for coming in today for our Friday meditation. This is really a wonderful opportunity to spend a little time together looking at a work of art, absorbing it perhaps in a unique and different way. And so today, when we do have a chance to be with the work, this 10th century Samanid bowl from northeastern Iran, I'll invite you to employ your imagination a little bit and to your senses, and even to vary your quality of attention. Meanwhile, I'll invite you to suspend judgment, the analysis portion of our, mental activity, so that we might experience the work more directly, perhaps underneath the thinking mind, we might say. So, before we take a look at the artwork, this bowl, let's just get comfortable. So find a comfortable seat. This might be a nice vertical position with the head above the spine. If you're resting in a chair, then resting the back comfortably. And settle in. Our days are often so busy, and even if we're not physically active, mentally active because of the amount of information that we're exposed to. So here we step back, step away from that for a bit, and even close the eyes. Take a moment to soften the eyes, close them if that's comfortable for you. And see if you might settle just a bit below the thinking mind into the quiet stillness underneath. To help that process, let's take a few diaphragmatic breaths. So a medium to full inhalation. Hold the expanded body for a moment and then exhale. And repeat at your own pace, medium to full. Pausing at the top and exhaling. Two more breaths in this fashion. When you release that last exhalation, descend again into the stillness. softening the breath. Now let's see if we might make our body more receptive simply by softening the face. Endeavor to soften the little muscles around the eyes, the forehead, the temples, the cheeks, the mouth and jaw. And may that subtle softening of the face be a model for your shoulders, elbows, wrists, and hands. Soft face, a model for your chest, and belly. Down to your hips, knees, ankles, and feet. Sense your whole body receptive. Now let's take a moment to softly open the eyes and get our first look at this bowl. 10th century Samanid bowl, northeastern Iran. Let's take it in for a moment. And then from another angle, we're starting to get a glimpse of the interior of the bowl. And then from the top down, be with the whole work for a moment, noting what comes forward to you. Now let's explore this work and get to know it a little more closely. Here we have the full object in our view. But now I'll zoom in. Let's take a look at the very center, this rosette figure. Notice the subtle color difference relative to what surrounds it. The 6 petals. And notice further what's wrapped around it, this abstract tree with 5 branches. Each branch terminating in a 3-leaf figure, palmette. Notice too how these branches seem to have a general trajectory, a kind of clockwise movement. A clockwise arabesque, you might say, as if the tree is dancing. Now, ingeniously, the one branch that seems to move counterclockwise brings our attention to this, maybe call that a root ball. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it seems to point to this figure here, which draws our attention to the Kufic script that lines the perimeter of this bowl. So let's notice this now, the inscription. Tenth century Arabic. An inscription that reads, "It is said, those who are content with their own opinion run into danger." Notice the script. Those who are content with their own opinion run into danger. That phrase ends here at this floral motif, and another phrase is added, blessing to the owner, indicating that this beautiful bowl was indeed a gift with a special message. Now let's pause our attention once again at the rosette, your gaze at its center point, soft. Let the whole body be soft. Such an interesting message surrounding this beautiful interior dance. Let's take a closer look at one of the features of this piece. This panel here, this shape, irregular, yet with seeming sharp edges. following the contour of the script, marking it in its own way. This type of shape is repeated again. Another panel here. A panel here. All the way around the bowl. Stark contrast to the arabesque in the center. Now let's employ our imagination a moment and open our non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, open your left hand for a moment and imagine placing this panel, this irregular shape, in your hand. What would that feel like? Where would each of those edges meet the hand? What would it be like to tighten your hand around that shape? Hold that tension. And release. Let's try this same experiment with another panel. This one over here, about 3 o'clock. Place that in your dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, imagine that somehow setting in your right hand, and you start to clasp it, sensing its sharp edges against the skin. Hold that tension. And release. Let's try this same experiment one more time with one more panel over here. But clasp it with both hands now. So activating both hands around this irregular shape. Look at its points. Feel those edges against the skin. Hold fast for a moment. And release. What is the body's response to such shapes? What's the visceral consequence of holding fast to such an object? Now let's return to the center, the rosette. Rest your attention then right there and soften, gazing into the center circle. Now let's attend a bit to this tree. Maybe even follow the interior of the branches. So what I encourage you to do is to move with the breath and notice that the artist has given nice little stopping points so that we might inhale, travel to this two-line figure, and then exhale, following the curved path. And then inhale beyond the move again. Exhale, continue. Inhaling further into the branch, to the leaves. Exhaling, returning. Inhaling, following this beautiful organic curve. And exhaling, going on your way. Can you do that for yourself now for a bit? Moving your attention fluidly with breath within the branches. Your attention, breath, engaged in a kind of dance. Circling in one direction, then another. Steady breath, steadying the mind, yet attention fluid. Engaged in a dance of joy. Through the tree. Now slow the dance. Bringing it to rest. Inviting the eyes, the gaze to return once again to the very center. Gently gaze at the center through the bottom third of your eyes. A settled gaze. At the still point. Around which the tree of life dances. This work of balance, yet astonishing asymmetries, might remind us of the perils of holding too tightly to set opinions. And perhaps to remind us that when our grasp is released, we are freed to flow again with the dance of nature. A remarkable gift this is, indeed. Now, to close our practice, I invite you all to draw one hand to the heart, the other hand on top, and to bow to one another. Peace, peace, peace. I turn the mic over to Grace and Matthew. Thank you all for your presence today.
Thank you, Phil, for taking us into that work in such a beautiful way. I almost don't want to say anything else. Just want to leave a little space for a moment. But I'd like to introduce my colleague, Matthew Loznoski, who can tell us a little bit more about this beautiful bowl. Matthew?
Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew. Thank you for the great introduction, Grace. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. I'm going to reshare the view of the bowl so that we can all see it. I want to thank Phil for getting us to look closely at this wonderful artwork, looking at all the different details and sharing more about the calligraphy and the message of it. I wanted to start by having us consider the person who made or the people who worked together to make this object. And if we step back and think about what skills and training they might have needed, can help us perhaps to appreciate it a bit further. So the first thing that I think about is the amount of dexterity that someone would need to be able to write on this surface. When Phil showed earlier, this isn't a flat plate, it is a bowl. And the idea of writing on the edges of a bowl, this very beautiful script, would have taken an immense amount of patience, training, and dexterity. Um, One thing that I wanted to point out about this is we often think about text being on pen and paper, and calligraphy appearing on ceramics begins in this region around the 10th century in northeastern Iran. And it is in this dynasty, the Samanid dynasty, where it becomes more common to see these kinds of calligraphy on decorative objects. Um, and it is really important for that particular place. So the message that we had that was a very moralizing one is common in a lot of different ceramics from this time period. And I'll get into that a little bit more. The other thing that I wanted to underline about the person who made it, that the writing itself is an established calligraphic form, one that doesn't reflect the maker's handwriting, but is an established norm where certain things like the length of letters and individual components are pre established by this writing form. And although this artwork was made in northeastern Iran, the Kufic script was developed in Kufa, a small town which is today in Iraq. So I like to kind of think about how these different styles and ideas move over time, and that this script is written in Arabic. And the reason for that is although this artwork was made um, in this, Persian dynasty, they were still a part of the larger Arab empire of the Abbasids, which was the second caliphate. And this is an example of how this dynasty kept cultural ties with the cultural center in Baghdad. So, by using Arabic as a language on the bowl, and then to also use a proverb that is an Arabic proverb. This isn't a Persian proverb, it's one that has an Arabic root. So, it's a testament to the connection between cultures and peoples. Um, the other thing that I just like to point out that we look at closely is the careful eye that an artist or maker would need to create this artwork and sort of planning out the details of the script and all of the different designs. And my eye goes to the border. So I'm going to move my mouse here, and you'll see how the script was so important that it actually had to go into the space of the border. And so there's a little gap here because they actually cannot make them. And so, on one hand, that shows how important to the design the calligraphy is, that its presence and its form took precedent over completing the edge of the bowl. Another anomaly that I don't necessarily have an explanation for, and if you have any ideas in the chat, I'd be welcome to hear them, is over here where the red, black becomes two black pieces in a row. It's just an interesting thing that I'd like to point out. One theory is that they wanted to end with a red one, and so that kind of resets the pattern and sort of breaks it into a certain way of sort of ending up the same as it was before, which might actually tie into our quote quite well about sort of keeping to your own opinions. So that's just something to keep in mind. Um, so the message itself that comes from the calligraphy, Phil pointed out that it starts right here and goes around clockwise, and also pointed out that these little motions here, so these little arrows, they help the viewer know which direction the text is going. And then this little rounded edge here gives you a clear indication on where it begins. So that also underlines the importance of this writing, that the design feature on the interior or central part of the bowl guides the reader in the correct direction and also tells you where to begin reading. Um, so, a little bit more about this moral message that we're getting, this ethical message about kind of changing your own opinions or not sticking to them so firmly, and the danger that that can create. So, like I said, this is an Arabic or Arab proverb. And at the time, there were these books that were created that said which types of proverbs would be acceptable on bowls and different objects. They also were featured on clothes as well as bottles. And in some of these books, they even wrote messages on mosquito nets, which might not have survived as well as a ceramic that we can see today. But we know from these books that such messages would have appeared on other types of objects during that time period. And for me, the idea of writing on a bowl is something that reminds me of the image from the Quran where Allah is a potter and the humankind is clay in some way. So that this message of bettering oneself or opening up oneself, it does have some. It's not. This is not like a script from the Quran, but it also has a message about how we might shape ourselves to be better people through this message and through living by what it is saying. So I won't go too much into the central part because I think Phil did a really great job of talking about the 5 different branches, the tree trunk, and the rosette. But what I would like to talk a little bit more about is how this object was made. So when the clay form was created, it would have had an earthenware color, kind of like a brownish orange red hue. Um, so the first step would have been to apply a white slip. So the white color that you see here would have been applied first over the body of the ceramic. A slip is sort of like a semi-fluid clay, liquidy form that sort of goes over it. Then the other 2 colors that you see here, the black and then the reddish color, would have come from ochre. So those would have been applied on top of the white slip and would have been done at around the same time. So you can imagine while the artist or artists were making this, they would have perhaps started with the calligraphy and went around it, or the central part, adding these areas of black and these areas of red. And that process would have happened at the same time for those 2 colors. The last step would have been to add a glaze over it. So you can see kind of in this corner here how it has this kind of shininess to it. It's obviously faded over time, but the texture and this glaze sort of helps cement and keep the color together for people while so that when you use it, the color or pigmentation doesn't fall off as quickly and helps keep it together. So yeah, I think those are the main points that I wanted to share, but I also see in the chat that there's lots of questions coming through. So I wanted to leave time to answer some of those as well, because I see we only have 5 minutes left.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew. That was illuminating. And I can read a few of the questions, or if you want to answer any that you see in the chat, feel free.
You can read them.
Okay. We had one question that was just about whether, if we know, was this bowl used or not? Was it decorative? Anything you want to say about that?
So I don't think we know definitively of the group of bowls made from this time period. Some of them were used. One thing that is very popular is that the writing itself on, especially plates. So since this is a bowl, but for plates, you could kind of cover them with food. And the idea is that you could uncover the message over the course of a meal or company with people. I think with this one in particular, that might have been less probable because, as you can tell, it's a bowl and the letters are at the top of the bowl. So it would have had to been pretty full to hide a message, but it definitely could have been possible. But that kind of idea that these would have been used does happen, but we don't have any evidence, like scientifically, that that this was used in that way. But plates in particular were really thoughtful ways to kind of cover the message in a fun way to reveal them over time.
We also had a couple people asking about those sharp-edged shapes with the flowers around the edges that Phil pointed out to us. And are those just merely to like echo the shape of the calligraphy, or do they have some other significance?
So just like I pointed out with the border, where the calligraphy took, we're not completing the border because the calligraphy is there and the other elements are pointing the way the calligraphy is. That's our chief design component that we're really sort of organizing around. So where these flowers are filled in, my best guess looking at the other elements that these are simply to fill the edges around the calligraphy and to fill those shapes so that it kind of mirrors the calligraphy.
Someone mentioned in the chat that they see sort of green smudges in the middle. And after they mentioned that, I started seeing those green smudges as well. I'm not sure if that's a photographic effect or if that's something that's actually on the bowl.
So it is something that is on the bowl. It's not a patina because that's something that happens with bronzes, but there are little cracks in the bowl. And actually, when this piece came to the museum, it came in several pieces. And one of our objects conservators, Ellen Chase, actually went through and helped piece this together. So some of those green marks might be from wear and tear and from sort of being apart over time. But Ellen would have more details probably about the coloration and things like that. But I do know that it hasn't stayed in one piece throughout its entire lifetime. And part of what the museum has done is help bring it back together as much as we can.
Another person mentioned in the chat, if you think this bowl might have been intended to be used for a meditation the way we used it, almost like a mandala is made for meditation, because I guess that person thought this worked so well. Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think since this isn't unique to have like a lesson or proverb on these bowls, I think that this kind of meditation session is well suited to this group of ceramics because there's always some sort of lesson of self-improvement that appears from this time period on this group or set of bowls. So I think it's a great choice for meditation. I don't know if people at that time would have practiced it, but I think for how it's come to us now, it really does resonate and show that how we can continue to appreciate it now.
Okay, we have one more question from Catherine, which I do think is a good question. I was confused about this myself and have been looking at it for a couple of days now. Can you clarify the direction of the text? Everything about the bowl seems to point clockwise, but isn't Arabic read from right to left, which would seem to suggest counterclockwise. Indeed. And Matthew, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so I think how I've understood it is this is where it begins, and then you would read it from right to left. So I think it's from the inside of the bowl, right? No, it's from the outside.
From the outside. So if you imagine you're standing at the edge of the bowl and kind of looking in, rather than from being inside the bowl and looking out. So if you are on the edge of the bowl looking in, then it does go from right to left and continues around the edge.
Yeah,
it is confusing for a non-Arabic speaker maybe to figure out.
Yeah, and I also think because the photograph, we kind of look at it from the inside out. You kind of need to. It's almost like you need to see it in the gallery one day, and sort of see it from the outside looking in. Yeah.
And anything in particular about the color choice of black and red, and if that was common in other artworks at the time?
Yeah, the more colors you use, the more money you spent on the bowl. Black is the default color, so you'll see some that are just black in nature. Since this has a real message, they also went with a real artist because as things become popular, there are some surviving ceramics from this time period that have pseudo-Arabic written on them, where people just wrote letters on it to sort of be like, "Look, here's a message for you." But not everyone could read or literacy rates. So what you can tell from this is there was some level of extra cost associated with the two colors, and since it was real Arabic, that also shows that it was made by a true workshop as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Thanks for your time, and thank you so much, Phil, for leading us through this experience.